All right. Good evening and welcome everyone to the 2026 live event from the Business of Aesthetics, where your success matters. Tonight's discussion, patient-centered aesthetics, the art of listening, assessment, and ethical treatment, dives into the hidden tensions between aggressive growth targets and clinical credibility that can erode your profitability and peace of mind. I'm your host, Dan Adisha, and alongside our featured expert, we'll uncover actionable strategies to avoid overtreatment, build unwavering patient trust, and create a practice that actually builds your wealth. Now, we'd like to start by giving a massive thank you to our platinum sponsor, Echo Marketing, founded by Naren Arulraja, the very same founder of the Business of Aesthetics community. For nearly 20 years, Equa has helped aesthetic practice owners across the globe stop being the best kept secret in their hometown. They believe that great care deserves great visibility. And here's a quick tip from our team at Equa that is important to all practice owners listening in. Let me ask you this. When potential patients in your area search for treatments that you offer, perhaps Morpheus 8 or Botox near me, does your practice actually show up or are they finding your competitors instead? This is a major challenge, and you might be offering amazing services, but if you're not visible online, you are missing out. So, the good news is with the right digital marketing strategy, local SEOs, targeted ads, and funnel-based content, you can convert inquiries into actual patients. Stick around till the end because Equa has something very special for you that will take your online presence to the next level. Now, let's quickly align on where we are heading over the next hour. The aesthetic industry is more competitive than ever, but today it's about stepping back to redefine what true success looks like. We're going to discuss how to redefine beauty through empathy and how harnessing the simple power of active listening can become your ultimate tool to building unshakable patient trust. We'll also tackle the tough reality of avoiding overtreatment while still managing very real business pressures, ensuring that your clinical decisions always prioritize patient well-being. Ultimately, this session is about how to educate your patients to make informed choices, allowing you to build a legacy and a reputation rooted in genuine care and not just quick results. Now, let's meet our featured expert for this session. Our featured expert for tonight knows what it takes to build a championship winning culture and a highly profitable practice. After starting his career leading St. Edward's University to its first basketball conference championship, he realized that the same exact principles of discipline, strategy, and resilience apply to business. Today, as a senior financial consultant at Maven Financial, he helps healthcare and aesthetic practices plug their profit leaks, navigate intense growth pressures, and turn clinical excellence into long-term financial wealth. He's here to show us how to build a reputation rooted in care that fundamentally strengthens your bottom line. Please welcome Andrew Miller.
Thank you, Don. Happy to be here. Should be
Great
fun.
to have you here, Andrew. Now, let's get into the discussion here. Let's see. Andrew, what are the financial patterns that show a practice is prioritizing short-term aesthetic demand over long-term patient trust in 2026?
Yeah, I mean that's a loaded question. I mean, I know that that's a good one to kind of start the discussion here a little bit. But really, and when I work with a lot of our plastic surgeons, aesthetic practices here at Maven, and for those that don't know, we're fractional CFO CFOs for aesthetic practices across the country. And a lot of times practice owners, practice managers, COOs are kind of focused on the short-term lens of what do I need to do now? And a lot of times, while that's okay to a degree, it's really kind of best to look at like the long-term approach, the values of the practice, kind of where you want to end up being. So a lot of times, when we're identifying, that short-term demand and what they're doing, we see a lot of like a spike in revenue more than anything. A big spike would kind of lead us to believe, okay, one, if it's beyond seasonality, that we'd run some sort of, promotion or discount offering, which we never really love because again, it's not really, um, I guess it's not the best patient profile, I think, for the practices that we work with to a degree. We're trying to find that patient that's going to be with us for, the long haul, kind of through thick and thin, and trying to create relationships as opposed to, just trying to like fill schedules. So really, that's kind of the
Mhm.
first thing that we typically see when they're kind of prioritizing that short-term aesthetic demand is, do we see a spike? Why was it? Was it because of some crazy promotion? And then, with that, then we can kind of see, from the financial side, if there was that spike, well, are we actually profitable from that spike? And most of the time, when there is some sort of discount flash sale, anything like that, it tells me that, we were just kind of focusing on that short-term demand, short-term push just to try to like get us over some sort of hump. So really more than anything, it's I don't we don't necessarily like that because it doesn't necessarily lead us to having that long-term patient that's gonna, be with us for, with a treatment plan, so on and so forth. So that's probably the biggest thing that
Mhm.
I've seen. And if you, maybe need a specific example down, let me know. But
Yeah.
usually, again, whenever biggest time client, when we're meeting on a month over month basis, it's, what can we do now? And it's really, well, it's like, well, what do we want the practice to be? And, not only in the next month, but, the next 12 months or the next 60 months, whatever it may be. So that's typically what we're seeing, and we're trying to really just focus on an actual long-term treatment plan to get them to the results that they desire, obviously in an ethical way, without just trying to push, this short-term demand just to kind of put butts in seats more than anything.
Okay, let's uncover some of the things you said there. Patient profile, the ideal patient profile. What's the best way about going and building the ideal patient profile for a clinic?
I mean, I think that just that varies clinic to
Hmm.
clinic, what you're doing. I think fortunately for me, I say that it varies because, working with plastic surgeons and med spas and dermatology offices and even kind of dabbled in the dental space, which we're not really talking about now, but you know, with my clients that are primarily plastic surgery, that patient profile looks very different than someone that's an exclusive med spa versus someone that is a combo practice. A lot of times their patient profile is someone that's coming in for Botox, and then at that point they end up becoming a surgery patient, and then they kind of go back to their um, aesthetic treatments post surgery. So I think it does look pretty different, but whenever we're meeting with our clients and, our first meeting with them is usually setting those goals and, trying to set up the practice for success from a financial standpoint, we always, try to ask them to take a step back and say, well, where do you see yourself not only within the practice, but what does the practice look like in the next, 5 to 10 years? Is it someone that's really focusing on a high level of service, not trying to be the cheapest practice, someone that's got a reputation for doing quality work with quality providers, or is it, are we a volume practice and we're trying to just kind of get people in and out? Most of the time, it's the former. We don't really have practices that are trying to be that volume practice. So when they're kind of identifying that patient profile, it's someone that's looking for, serious results, over a series of treatments. And again, it's not just come in and inject me with 50 units and be done with it. It's there's a well-developed treatment plan and there's follow-ups and there's a relationship that's built.
Okay. Now, is there ever a good time to offer discounts?
Um, I would probably say as a CFO, uh, probably would say no, but there is, certain, circumstances where yes, you know what I mean? It's one of those where if we have, a good amount of inventory that may expire, or we're trying to we have a new potential device and we're trying to maybe, you know, get that out there, get a new service line out there. So there are, certain circumstances where it's okay for us beyond the inventory factor, so that way that inventory doesn't go to waste. We typically say, let's maybe discount things in the sense that aren't very high cost of goods, so that way it doesn't affect the profitability all that much. We never like discounting injectables just because of how expensive they are. Um, so under certain circumstances, yes, but we also we pride ourselves and we tell our clients, we don't really want to be a discount shop. That's not the patient profile that we're looking at. Because usually that patient profile, they're going to kind of try to find that cheapest price wherever it may be. And most of the time, it doesn't breed patient loyalty, rebooking, or client retention or anything like that, so and that's also kind of prioritizing that short-term demand is we'll see a big spike, we may see a big spike in new patients, but maybe 6 months down the line, that rebooking rate is not great. And it's usually because again there's a heavy discount, a heavy promotion, and that goes back to that patient profile, where they're just kind of discount hopping from practice to practice.
Check. Now, Andrew, if you don't mind, share a
Sure.
healthcare client example where growth pressure weakened judgment and what that revealed about protecting long-term business health.
Where growth pressure weakened judgment.
Yeah.
I mean, I've had this one client, it was, a couple years ago, they were really just so pressed on trying to drive that, revenue in any way that they possibly could. And it kind of clouded their judgment of what was potentially best for the practice and what was, kind of the overall vision of the practice. They were trying to really cut consult, times down. They were trying to, get anybody into the practice, kind of accepting anybody as a lead more than anything. And sure, revenue did spike, but at the same time, it was not sustainable and it wasn't long lasting. And it kind of goes back to that first question that you had asked, where it was, I don't want to say a call for desperation, but it was just as quickly as that revenue went up, that revenue went back down, because of that fact. It was they were going away from the overall values of what they wanted their practice to be because they felt that pressure of having that revenue increase, and
Mhm.
that growth increase. But again, just because we have that top line increase, that doesn't always necessarily lead to profitability. So yeah, sure, our
Mhm.
revenue numbers may look great, but our profitability usually suffers, when that happens because again, it's usually by way of, discounting, giving things away, trying to bundle too many treatments altogether. And again, top line revenue, top line numbers look great, but profitability, and usually that question is like, we feel like we made a lot of money, but where is it? And it's like, well, it's usually eaten up in consumable cost and other things that kind of, people don't see. So that one example, going back to it, is they were just, they were trying to, and I don't want to say cut corners, but it was like, hey, let's shorten up consultation time, let's shorten up appointment times. And in theory, that worked a little bit, but what they gave up in, appointment times and or I guess increasing appointment times is they got rid of, their relationship building, and a lot of times in the aesthetic business, and I don't want to say people will go and visit their friends, uh, you know, in the practice, but a lot of times, we're trying to, there's a fine line between wasting time in the treatment room, but also
Mhm.
developing that relationship with your, with the provider. And people know this. It's one of those where most patients to a degree, I think practice owners want the patient to go to the practice for the overall experience. A lot of times, though, they're going to a provider because they've developed that relationship with them, you know, over the course of, several months or several years. So in this specific example, it was plastic surgery and, med spa. They were really trying to build up the med spa side of the business, and they were really
Mhm.
trying to run it maybe a little too corporate to a degree. And it
Mhm.
was we have to, it's volume, it's volume, it's volume. And again, by shortening up those times, yes, they were able to see more, but again, there was no loyalty to a degree. And again, that short-term growth pressure really kind of just weakened that overall like judgment of what they wanted their practice to be.
And what specific guardrails were put in place after that realization to ensure that it never happened again?
So, in coming from the CFO side, the financial side, we're looking at KPIs on the provider side of things and on the practice side of things. And, I always say we try to not incentivize, but, give direction. But at the end of the day, the business owner is, kind of responsible for those decisions. But, we're really priding ourselves on, not only, kind of bringing those uh, overall appointment numbers down by hour, but also
Mhm.
looking at, our new patient and our rebooking rates too, because to me, it's one of those when we're looking at the overall metrics and the KPIs of things, um, and we're reviewing that with clients, they're like, "Oh, we don't our new patient counts down." I'm like, "Well, our retention rate is way up." So that just tells me that, yeah, we want to have a healthy balance of both, but when our retention rate's really high and our new patient, rate is maybe a little bit lower, that tells me that the providers are doing what they need to do and they're doing one, good work, and two, creating that relationship in the room with that patient, and it's
Mhm.
bringing them back. So then at that point, we kind of shift our focus to maybe some marketing towards, okay, let's keep on with that rebooking rate and keep doing what they're doing and within the practice. But now we kind of shift the focus a little bit. So it's looking at the overall metrics of the providers. And, there's certain metrics that, we look at the hard data, the numbers, and the practice owners and the practice, managers, they're day to day, we're typically not. So a lot of time the numbers and the feelings most of the time jive together. So when
Mhm.
we're looking at the overall data, we can say, hey, look, this is kind of what we're seeing. Do the numbers kind of support what you're feeling? And most of the time it's yes in that sense. So, those guardrails are really, kind of taking a step back and focusing on the quality of the work instead of the quantity of it.
Okay. What's a healthy rebooking rate look like?
So that's another one of a loaded question because if you're looking at it, there's two different rebooking rates, and it really depends on what the EMR can capture. One of the rebooking rates is a 24-hour rebooking rate to where is that patient rebooking within 24 hours, and then there's an overall rebooking rate, which is that patient rebooking at any time after their appointment is over with and before they come in again. So
Okay.
if we can, we'd like to pull both. And it's all really EMR dependent and what data we
Yeah.
can get. So with that 24-hour metric, we typically see rebooking rates anywhere in that 35, maybe 40% range is pretty good because again, it is within a 24-hour window of when that appointment's over with. And a lot of times, patients will say, hey, I have to double check my schedule, kids, life happens. So that one's always going to be pretty, it's going to be lower than the overall rebooking rate of, rebooking at any point after that appointment. So for that second
Mhm.
metric, we typically see that 60 to 70% range is kind of like that benchmark of where we want to be at when it's
Okay.
that overall, rebooking rate that's spans beyond that 24-hour range.
Okay. Now, Andrew, where are you seeing the biggest disconnect between what aesthetic practices celebrate publicly and what sustains a healthy business underneath?
Yeah, I think it's a lot of what we've talked about to a degree, and I see that, and I say, and when you say publicly, I'm taking that as what they're kind of celebrating with the team, and
Yeah.
a lot of it with the team is, did we meet our revenue goal? Did we meet our revenue goal? Did you meet your revenue goal? Which those are all great. We look at that with our clients every month. We develop, client scorecards or rather patient scorecards so that way they can have meetings with their provider scorecards and say, okay, this was your revenue goal, this was your appointment target, this was your revenue per hour goal. So I think a lot of that is what the focus is, which is great because most of the time that's going to lead to a healthy and successful practice. But in reality, it goes back to, again, more than anything, looking at, yes, are they meeting their revenue goals, but are they doing it in a healthy way of, again, is our rebooking rate good? Is our capacity or utilization number good? Because again, we track that as well. So we want that utilization number to be at about 75 to 80%. Nothing
Mhm.
really beyond that, because when you get above that 80% mark, there's a fear of burnout to a
Okay.
degree with a provider. So the biggest disconnect, and again, I think it goes back to just, when we see when we're looking at it with our uh, clients is, it's did we meet the revenue target? Yes. And most of the time it's celebrated, but it's like, well, let's kind of take that, look under the hood a little bit and, yes, we beat it, but are we actually making money on the bottom line? And then again, that goes back to, you know, doing things, correctly, treatment planning, rebooking rates, not discounting anything because we could have really high revenue months and really, meeting those targets, but it doesn't actually mean that we're taking home any cash at the end of the day.
Check. Now, what is the most toxic, perhaps, vanity metric that's currently being accepted in the med spa industry?
The most toxic what metric, I'm sorry?
Vanity metric.
From the from the owner standpoint, you think? Or
Absolute.
mm, like from owner to patient or just owner to business?
Owner to business, really.
The most vanity, I mean, um, I do think it is just that overall top line growth is probably, I don't want to say the most toxic,
Right.
but it is the one thing that is, anytime I get a email from a client, it's like, how far are we away from our goal? How far are we away from our goal? And again, that I think
Mhm.
sometimes takes away, it's we love the fact that our clients are looking at that, but that
Mhm.
sometimes can be missed of what there's sometimes a bigger story of us maybe not hitting that goal, and again there's so many different factors that go into that play of us hitting it or not. It could be that a provider maybe had a bad month, maybe had to take some time off, whatever it may be. So I do think that that is some sort of that quote unquote vanity, and it could be toxic to a degree because the more data that we do put in front of our clients, again, it goes back to focusing a lot on, revenue targets, which again, it's more of how are we getting to that revenue target and are we doing it the right way? Are we doing it ethically? And I do think that goes back to again, culture, or practice culture more than anything, because we want we also, while we want them to hit those revenue goals and those targets, we want to make sure that they're being done um, in a way that the practice is successful and healthy, and um, providers are happy, ownership is happy. There's no, the biggest thing that's that we see sometimes is, yes, revenue targets are being hit, but there's provider turnover, we're having to replace people a lot of the
Mhm.
times, and it's it's the overall picture of it. It's again, it's not how we're it's not what we're beating by, it's how we're getting there, and are we doing it the right way.
You spoke there about a very interesting topic, culture and making sure that the practice is healthy. So, what are the key signals that a practice is healthy internally in terms of culture?
So what we typically see is, again, going back to that utilization metric,
Okay.
we're looking at that pretty closely, not only on a provider level, but on a grouping level. So we group our providers based off of, provider type, whether it's, estheticians, injectors, NPs, mid-levels, doctors, whatever it may be. So, you know, we're looking at it and saying, okay, well, the esthetician department is running at 78% capacity. Let's
Right.
take a deeper dive. If we have three estheticians, are they all running at 78%? Or do we have two that are running at 90 and one that's running at 40? And it's kind of
Mm.
averaging out to that 78% mark. So one, we're looking at it kind of from a top-down approach where it's okay, what's the practice, capacity? And are we fully optimized? And then our
Mm.
provider types, are they fully optimized? And then if they are, then we
Mhm.
go back and we look at that provider level and say, okay, who's optimized, who's not? And then at that point, we're trying to either get the ones that are not optimized up to that 75-80% mark by, trying to uncover why they may or may not be getting there. Sometimes they're a newer provider to the practice, sometimes they're new to the area, sometimes they're just, fresh out of school and they don't have
Mm.
a following. Sometimes, they don't do well with patients, so there's
Yeah.
a myriad of factors there. So
Mhm.
more than anything, I think what breeds a good culture is, one that everyone's kind of carrying their own weight. We're looking for, diversified production across the board from
Yeah.
a practice in the sense that we don't want, any one provider carrying, 50% of the workload or whatever it may be, because we've seen that before and that sometimes can breed resentment more than anything. It's, it becomes a very, toxic workplace of it, I'm doing all the work and you guys aren't, and so on and so forth. So that's kind of the first thing that we're looking for. And then I do think from the owner side of things, what I've seen uh, that leads to a really healthy and kind of dynamic practice is when the owner is takes a step back from being a provider and is really
Right.
focusing on being, a coach and a leader to them,
Mhm.
and they're almost empowering them to run their mini practice within the overall practice. And that, I think most providers like that to a degree, the ones that want to grow and the ones that maybe aspire to be a business owner one day. And I have, one client in particular on the West Coast that it was pretty hard for the owner to take that step back, and she, her and her partners had this, goal to, one, expand their current space, two, move into a second location. But I said, you guys are doing a lot of the work and you guys are working in the business instead of on the business. And it was about a year and a half transition of said, hey, look, we're gonna intentionally goal you to not do as much. That way you can focus on your team. And ever
Mm.
since that's happened, it's, it was a little bit of a rough patch at the beginning, but ever since that happened, she's focused so much on coaching and developing and, kind of giving her trades of her practice. And then by that same note, the providers are kind of owning up to it and enjoying, kind of again working, having their own little mini practice within a practice. They're investing time in, continuing education, going to conferences, you know, um, going to classes, bringing, people over to the practice to train with them. And, it's one of those where, they're hitting their goals. They just opened up their second location and it, knock on wood, I'm meeting with them tomorrow actually. And everything is, you know, humming in the way that it's supposed to. But again, it was a kind of a big trust, initiative that had to take place. And, the owner had to trust her providers. The providers had to trust the owner that this was all going to kind of work out. So I think the biggest thing is trust within everybody in the practice, and that's kind of, led to that really healthy overall work environment.
Amazing. Now, Andrew, with regards to being a coach, what makes a good coach? Now, you spoke about continued education opportunities, um, as well as what makes a coach uh, more on the inefficient side.
More on the efficient side, is that what,
Inefficient.
or more, what makes a coach inefficient? Is that what the question?
Yes.
Oh man,
Yes.
that's micromanaging would probably be the first one that comes to mind. A lot of business owners I think want to be that coach and want to potentially be that resource, but a lot of times too there is a lot of frustration, and I think it if you don't have that trust within your team, a lot of
Mhm.
times I think sometimes, and I think a lot of people probably think this way. It's easier for me just, they think to themselves, it's easier for me to do it myself. And
Mm.
as a business owner, you're never going to really get to that point of, trust within your team to where they can, focus on what they need to do. And that way you can, focus on, say you like, as the business owner, you to, focus on that overarching goal of where you want that business to eventually be. So I do think the most inefficient, way to do that is by micromanaging and by not being able to trust your team to do what they need to do and not maybe taking that step back from, going from provider to business owner. Because again, we know that, when you're a provider and trying to be a business owner, that's really taxing not only on, your body, but probably family and relationships. So it's
Absolutely.
almost a necessity to take that step back and to have that trust in your team.
Gotcha. Now, give me the telltale signs of a good coach.
To that same vein, it trust, that's the biggest thing. I mean, trust, empowering your team, listening, I think is more than anything, listening to what they want, investing in them. And that's kind of what I've seen with this practice, more than anything. It's, you know,
Mm.
when we're talking now, it's, hey, this provider wants to do this. Can we afford to do it? What's the return on investment? Go through the numbers, make sure it makes sense. And I think that's what it is. It's listening to what your team is wanting or what certain people are wanting and trying to guide them to get there. Because again, every person within that team has their own individual goals. And I think it's trying to potentially align that with the growth of the practice. So you're not only, focusing on just the overall growth of the practice, you're trying to make sure that each individual, whether it's, front desk to provider, is meeting and exceeding the goals that they want for themselves. So I think it goes back to that trust factor, but also listening to what they want and what they need, and then giving them the tools to succeed in their role.
Gotcha. Thank you very much for that, Andrew. Now, Andrew, this conversation about protecting credibility and patient trust is exactly what practice owners need to hear. But, well, I should say, and here's the harsh reality. If patients who desperately need your high standard of ethical care cannot find you online in the first place, none of this may matter. The clinics prioritizing quick cash will win the click. So that's why we're thrilled to partner with Equa Marketing for this event. Equa is one of the most trusted digital marketing organizations in the US and Canada, supporting over 500 healthcare practices. And tonight, Equa is offering our attendees a complimentary marketing strategy meeting worth $900. Um, in your strategy session, you'll sit down with a senior marketing analyst who already works with thriving aesthetic practices across North America. You'll get a live audit of how you can attract more clients, build your reputation, and grow sustainably. The marketing analyst will actually spend several hours researching your online presence, your competition, your local SEO, even AEO, now that AI is involved, and everything along the way. They'll come to the call ready to walk you through custom recommendations just for your practice. This session is designed to help you answer those questions and fix anything that's not quite working. It's a $900 valued session, completely complimentary for you tonight. You'll see a QR code on the screen. You can scan that with your phone to book your session or check the chat for a direct link. It'll take less than a minute to book. Availability is limited since, as I mentioned, every audit involves real research into your local market. Um, so perhaps here's a way to think about offers like this. What's the risk if you say yes? Honestly, it'll just be your time. There's no obligation whatsoever. But what's the risk if you don't? You might be missing out on something that could really help your practice grow. So I'll leave that with you, but truly, I encourage you to grab this opportunity, book your session with Equa. It'll be time well spent. Right. Um, okay, that's interesting. Right. So my next question to you, Andrew, is when patient education slows conversion, how should practice leaders weigh near-term revenue against long-term loyalty and reputational strength?
That's a good question. So I think a lot of times that it's taken for granted when that patient education does lead to that slower conversion. Yes, there is that potential short-term impact, but I do think there is that longer term impact where again, I think where business owners need to think of, not revenue just today, but revenue for the next 12 months, 24 months, and not only from this current patient, but from what the lifetime value of what this patient can bring. And that's always a tough, metric for us to measure because the lifetime value is not only what the patient is, obviously bringing us, but we always say that the best form of marketing is, referrals and word of mouth. So
Hmm.
a lot of times when there is kind of that slower conversion, patients may be a little bit more apprehensive, but they are trying to make maybe a little bit more of a, well-informed decision. And there's that fine line of being salesy, but also, trying to push them to make that right decision. But again, we want the patient to feel comfortable. So maybe if there isn't that same day conversion, it could lead to that higher trust, better outcomes, and then again, going back to that, retention and referrals. So um, I don't think whenever that question does come up with some of my clients, it's always, I like to play the long game more than anything. So I think it always helps to potentially follow up with, phone call, email, text message to the, patient if they are having some sort of apprehension about, making that decision. So again, I do think that, we always say conversion speed is not the same as conversion quality. Conversion quality
Hmm.
usually is uh, a better long-term approach to the practice overall. And again, we want that patient to come back, refer others, be happy, and then more than anything, trust the provider and trust the practice because it's the ultimate reputation of the practice overall.
So trust the practice, trust the provider. It all comes down to trust at the end of the day. Now, take us through perhaps how can we educate our patients to make more informed aesthetic choices?
I mean, I think it goes back to listening to what the patient wants and needs. And I think, transparency with the provider to the patient is key. I know that, and again, forgive me for people listening. I don't know all the technology that's out there, but I do know that there are, and I don't know the names of everything, but I know there are those facial scans, and there's a lot of technology available to pretty much simulate what sort of treatment's going to look like for somebody. And,
Hmm.
a patient may come in and say, I want, X amount of Botox or filler done or this treatment done. And an experienced provider may already know that that's not what the patient actually needs. So, with the use of technology and experience and saying, look, and coaching the patient through the process and say, I actually think that maybe this would look better. Let's kind of take a look and see what this could look like. And I think that's where trust is formed because again, it's out of respect, obviously, but it's not just agreeing to what the patient thinks that they want or need. It's actually showing them how maybe there is a alternative solution that could be more beneficial and more, long-term effective to them.
How important is it to show these alternative solutions and not just go along with what the patient comes in through the door requesting?
I mean, I think that it's that's one of the biggest conversations that we try to have to practice owners so that way they can kind of divulge that to their providers because it starts a conversation. And yes, that's where it goes back to where we're talking about kind of like a churn and burn practice as opposed to having maybe some longer appointment times. But when that happens, more than anything, it starts a conversation. And with that
Mhm.
conversation, usually some sort of goals or parameters are outlined with what the patient is looking for. And that's where we're, when we try to, coach the provider, and not us coach, but the practice owner or, some sort of salesperson coach them and say, this is where listening, active listening comes in. So, we always, when we go back to the practice owner wanting to listen to their employees, this is where the provider, needs to listen closely to what the patient is saying and, again, what outcome they actually want, and there may
Mhm.
be a more effective solution. And again, with that, if they can see that, one, they were honest with that and they can see the results happening maybe either quicker or there's a longer lasting result, that's where that trust comes in. But more than anything, that conversation just opens up a relationship and it opens up the idea of, hey, this is probably maybe better suited for you based on what you're telling me. Maybe
Mhm.
let's go through with this. And I always like to say too, I don't go to the doctor and I tell them what I need. There's always usually questions that are asked about, certain ways that I'm feeling or whatnot. So it's not my job to diagnose what's wrong with me. It's the doctor's job to do that. And sometimes it may very well be that the patient is right, but I do, from a due diligence standpoint, it is, it's very important for the provider to potentially, to start asking those questions so that way, you know, conversations can be had.
Okay. Now, Andrew, on the same line over there, how can we avoid overtreatment or rather even overselling, aligning clinical decisions with, at the end of the day, patient well-being?
It's still that, I mean, much of the same there. We don't want to over enjoy. That's always, the biggest thing. We never want for that to happen because that goes the other way with our, trust factor there. So I do think it's having that preliminary consultation of, saying, hey, look, this is what is your overall goal as a patient here? Is it short term? Is it long term? Is it preventative? What are we trying to do? And I think laying out that treatment plan, almost having like a patient profile, and that's kind of what we, talk about with some of our clients is kind of having that patient profile kind of already outlined. And some practices have that to where, there's three, four, five different patient profiles, whether it's, for just esthetician type services, whether it is for more injectable services. So that's kind of the way that we try to avoid that overtreatment is, one, trying to align. what the goals are of the patient, but also ethically from the standpoint of medicine and not,
Mhm.
you know, over prescribing to a degree, not that there is prescriptions, but over treating. So it's really just trying to understand the overall framework and the goals of what the patient is looking for and how that fits within the services that the practice provides, and
Mhm.
ensuring that they're gonna be met ethically.
Now, Andrew, you framed that really well with regards to, what's ethically good for the patient. Earlier on, you mentioned that if a service provider is interested in adding on a new type of service or new type of treatment, they might bring it to their practice owner. And
Mhm.
then the practice owner, to evaluate that, will bring it to you, the
Sure.
fractional CFO, to
Yep.
figure out the ROI of that. That made me really curious as to um, do practice owners overestimate their capabilities? I mean, uh, in trying to do all of these things at once.
Mhm.
Because if they are not coming to you, they're trying to figure out the ROI by themselves, or they're kind of going to wing it and see how things go. How have you seen that really play out with your clients?
That's a good question because it usually always happens right around November and December whenever laser season in or laser selling season is happening. It's very common right around this time, quarter end, and then obviously year end is another time. So yes, they do come to us and say, one, can we afford it? And then that's when we'll jump on a quick call with them, do a quick analysis. And a lot of times what we try to kind of steer from is this just a one or two patient need, or is there an actual gap that we're trying to fill? Because a lot of times, sometimes owners get excited with, a patient or two or three may ask for a certain service that we don't provide. So they think, oh, let's go
Mhm.
and potentially buy a device now. And I'm like, well, that's $200,000 and we've had three people ask about it. So it's going to be pretty tough to justify that. So yeah, it is a common theme, and we always try to say, okay, let's break it down. What's one, can we afford it? What's our, to not, I don't want to go too heavy into the finance side of things, but understanding what the debt position's like already, and are we going to pay for it in cash? And there's a lot of other factors. But once we get beyond the financial side of things and affordability, it's how long is it going to take to break even with this device, and what are the number of treatments? How are we going to package this? How are we going to sell this? Do our providers need any sort of, additional training? How long is that going to take? So a lot of those factors are, considered before new services are added, especially with services that require a device in that sense. So
Mhm.
we want to make sure that we check as many boxes as we can and that we're making the smartest decision possible, and we're not just trying to maybe fill a need for a handful of potential patients, but we're actually filling a gap for our overall base of patients more than anything.
How much of that do you think is practically, or rather reasonably, within the practice owner's scope of work? And when would you recommend them to come to you to really evaluate uh, a new venture?
So what we usually do is to at least try to garner the overall interest via, either survey or, a lot of times it's one of my practices up in the Northeast, that they're a combo practice with plastic and med spa, and they wanted to buy a new device. And, it was, I think, I want to say maybe September of last year. And he's like, oh, we've had two patients ask about it. So, well, we need to probably wait. That's not worth it. And then in October, it was, oh, we've had about five more people ask about it. I said, well, that brings a total of seven. So every month he kept, and it was, he took it on his own to basically write a list. And he came to me in December and said, hey, we have about 45 people that are interested and are willing to sign up and pay for that device. Is it okay if we pull the trigger? So we ran some numbers. I said, yep, I think we're pretty close to at least a break even if everybody signs up. And then on top of that, once we get some good before and after pictures and we can kind of market this, then we know that there's an interest there. So, those are kind of the steps that we like to try to take. And unfortunately, it is a little bit of a longer longer process to get to
Mhm.
that point. And for us as CFOs, we don't want to make a rash decision and a quick decision, especially when that could cost the practice quite a bit because we don't the last thing we want to see is a device just kind of sitting there just collecting dust. So yeah, that's how we try to evaluate it. It's more on overall need, and in that case, he he was able to do his due diligence and talk to his patients. But again, he did it himself as the surgeon. He coached his providers in the med spa to basically talk to the patient and say, look, we're thinking of bringing this on. What's your level of interest? And that's how
Mhm.
they were able to pretty much show me like, hey,
Mhm.
we can pay for this thing. Our services with this new device are one going to add something that we don't have. Two, it's going to add something that nobody within a 10-mile radius has. And three, we already have the patient base to at least break even on this.
There we go. Now, Andrew, faced with aggressive growth targets, what will help leaders choose restraint when faster revenue could undermine clinical credibility?
I mean, that's one of those where, you know, so basically we want to choose a restraint under, aggressive growth target. So,
Yeah.
we want to make sure that, we're balancing everything out with our revenue, retention and that overall outcome. And again, I feel like I'm somewhat repeating myself a little bit, but it's one of those where it's really that overall balance and that long-term impact of the practice. And again, we want to, one of our partners says it clearly, we don't want to step over to the dollar to pick up the penny. And a lot of that times, we try to coach our business owners not to do that, we're trying to grow smartly and ethically, and you know, be, and I say ethical in the sense of, hey, let's not over prescribe or over treatment plan or you know inject to a degree with some of these patients. So really, it's going back to developing that loyalty and that trust with our uh, providers and our patients. So that way, again, we can, you know, yes, we want aggressive growth, but we want it to be smart.
Absolutely. Now, on that note, what are some of the planning rhythms that best keeps owners aligned on patient trust, team behavior, as well as financial health before these small problems become expensive ones?
Yeah. So, I mean, with that, you can kind of look at that a different, several different ways more than anything. So, you know, I like to kind of break it out into the way that we do things where it's, monthly, we like to look at that performance to where, uh, scheduling optimization, conversion rates, rebooking, kind of that patient feedback that we're, getting from them. Beyond that, when you look at that quarterly and that annual type of alignment, it's, the overall
Mhm.
brand positioning, the actual patient experience is huge. That's at the end of the day, that's what we try to have our practice owners really care about is the overall, what's the experience that that patient is getting? Because at that
Yeah,
point, again, they're very likely to tell their peers about the practice. And that is the most effective marketing, you know, uh, that we've seen is word of mouth.
abs-
Because again, friends trust their friends. It's like, hey, go check this place out. They do great work. They've never steered me wrong. They actually helped me, see a different path than what I was thinking about. So, really, when we're looking at, staying aligned, it's the stuff that we do on that month-to-month basis, again, looking at utilization, looking at schedules, looking at rebooking rates. But beyond that, and this kind of falls a little bit more on that, on the practice owner side of things to where, strategically, what is the brand? What's the value of the practice? And what's that patient experience looking like? And is everybody, on the team in alignment of that to kind of grow, the practice and kind of grow it in that same direction?
Okay. Now, when you're talking about the experience of the patient and going in for referrals, you're talking about basically the reputation of the practice. Andrew, take me through what creates a practice, or rather the reputation, known for their care rather than just the results.
Yeah, and that goes back to to the little things. I think, it's one of those where when you know, when a provider remembers a little thing about, maybe you had a milestone or a big time life event, and when you come in 3 months later, they ask about that. It could be a certain aromatic smell in the practice that makes you feel a certain way. So usually the patient experience, it's, and not to discount people's I guess expertise as far as providing services, because again, that's the med spa market. There are med spas, as the joke is, on every block now, so it goes beyond just the service, and that's why we always say, those little personal touch points, more than anything, is huge when it comes to that patient experience. And it's again, it's one of those where it's how you make them feel, and it's putting that personal touch, whether again it is a handwritten note around the holidays, a handwritten note for a birthday, a little birthday surprise. Again, it's a provider asking, somebody how, again, their children are, whatever it may be. It's again, it's that extra mile white glove, Ritz-Carlton type of service that usually keeps people coming back, because that's hard to replicate, more than anything. And if you can couple that with, outstanding services, um, and, trust within the provider, then, you're going to set your practice up for success.
Check. Now, Andrew, we got a question from one of our registrants here. What practical tips or insights can I gain from consulting to pick up new growth ideas like pearls?
So just from any sort of consult, like from
Consulting.
financial consult,
Well,
or
you're the
yeah.
financial consultant, so
Yeah. So really with that, when, we really try to focus on, the future, in the sense, and planning. So the insights that, we really try to focus on more than anything is looking at the overall financial health of the practice by looking at, profit and loss statements, balance sheets, but also looking at our overall providers, and looking at, how
Mhm.
they're doing. Are they fully utilized? Can they be doing more per hour? Could their schedules be a little bit more full? And at the same time, we use that data to forecast into the future. And a lot of it is going to be based on the overall goals of the practice, and the practice owner, to say, "Oh, you know what, I want to maybe expand and grow into a second location or a third location, but I don't want to take out a loan for it." Well, you know what,
Mhm.
let's plan for that and say, okay, we have an 18-month journey to get there. These are the numbers that we need to hit, again, the right way, smartly, strategically. So that way we can plan and predict cash flow, and we can, make sure that we can set you up for success. And at that same vein, we have practice owners that come to us and say, you know what, I want to sell my practice in 3 years. Let's try to optimize this, in the most efficient way possible. So again, we go back, we start looking at provider data, we start looking at practice data, and we try to plan and budget and forecast, into the future, so that way we can try to get you to that goal. And then, beyond that, it's the little insights of, why do I feel like my practice is down this month? Does every one of your other clients feel that they're down? Is it seasonality? Is it geographic location? Is it economic factors? Whatever that may be. So, I think the most important, I think, insights that we typically give are, are those little key nuggets on a month-to-month basis from, what are other clients seeing? How are they feeling? And how does my practice kind of fit in to what all the other practices are seeing and feeling at any given point in time.
Gotcha. Now, as we wrap up, Andrew, what is the single most important step a practice owner can take tomorrow to align their financial growth goals with patient-centered care?
That's a good question. I would probably say for that, I mean, we probably want to make sure that our providers, one, have all the tools in place, to provide, the outstanding care that they need. And again, that goes back to, trust, but also at the same time, we want to make sure that they're being as efficient as possible. So that way, again, we can, you know, hit those revenue targets, hit the goals, hit our profitability targets that we want. So I think more than anything, it's making sure that each provider has the tools that they need to be as successful as they can to work with patients on a day-to-day basis. Um, and that way it keeps the patients coming back for a little bit more.
Well, thank you very much for that, Andrew. And right. So now, before we wrap up, a quick reminder to our audience. As a We want to ensure that your ethical practice is the one patients actually find online. So do not miss out on Echo Marketing's $900 marketing strategy meeting gift. The link is in the chat for a few more minutes as we wrap up. And it has been an incredible session, Andrew. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise and, of course, showing us that ethical care and financial success are not mutually exclusive. To our audience, thank you for investing an hour in your practice's success tonight. And as you close the Zoom, a brief feedback survey will pop up on your screen. Please take 30 seconds to fill it out. It'll help us bring it'll help us bring you the exact events and panelists that you need. Now, with that being said, thank you so much, everyone. Wish you a wonderful evening. Stay resilient, and we will see you at the next Business of Aesthetics expert panel. Take care.